Berdella is a serial killer who tortured and killed at least 6 people. His crimes first came to light back in 1988 and made headlines across the country.
The summer of the 1980s in Kansas City was a city caught between the fading hum of post-industrial America and the quiet desperation that lingered in its shadowed streets. Neon signs flickered dimly above cracked sidewalks where a restless youth moved through late-night bars and alleys, seeking escape or oblivion. The scent of rain mixed with the acrid tang of exhaust, seeping into the air like a slow poison that blanketed the city's forgotten corners. It was an era before the internet's promise of connection, before mobile phones stitched lives together in a digital web. Here, isolation carried a different weight. The underground world thrived on whispered rumors and fragile alliances, especially among those living on the margins. The gay community, vibrant yet vulnerable, faced dangers both unseen and brutal, their existence often hidden behind closed doors and careful glances. This was a time when trust was scarce, and suspicion hung like fog. The AIDS crisis was rising, casting a pall of fear and stigma. Policing of LGBTQ+ spaces was inconsistent, often hostile. The shadows that gathered in this milieu were not just metaphorical, but material, places where prey and predator could slip unnoticed into each other's orbits. Amidst this fragile ecosystem lived Robert Berdella, a man whose quiet eccentricity and neighborhood familiarity belied the horrors that would soon unfold within the walls of his modest home on Charlotte Street. The community around him was unaware, or perhaps unwilling to see the darkness that thrived behind the everyday masks. In this cityscape shaped by cultural shifts, latent prejudices, and quiet desperation, Berdella began a descent that would expose not just the vulnerabilities of his victims, but the fissures in a society unprepared to protect its most marginalized. The very environment that allowed him to operate, hidden in plain sight, was a reflection of larger, unspoken fractures: fear, neglect, and the failure to confront the invisible. The house on Charlotte Street sat quietly under the early evening haze, its tired facade blending seamlessly into the fading daylight. Inside, the air hung thick with the mingled scents of stale cigarette smoke, antiseptic, and something less definable, a metallic undertone that teased at the edges of perception. In the basement, a single bare bulb cast flickering shadows against the rough concrete walls, illuminating the meticulously arranged chaos of ropes, chains, and makeshift restraints. The air was cool, unnervingly still, broken only by the faint drip of water echoing somewhere deep in the walls. The young man was disoriented, eyes glazed with the residue of drugs coursing slowly through his veins. His breaths were shallow, punctuated by occasional tremors. There was no immediate pain, only the slow dawning of captivity, a creeping realization as the tape muffling his protests dulled into silence. Robert moved through the room with quiet precision, hands steady but deliberate. He avoided sudden movements. The terror, he knew, was in the anticipation, the waiting. Restraints were tightened just enough to prevent escape, but not so much as to provoke a struggle. The man's pulse fluttered beneath trembling skin, a fragile thread tethering him to consciousness. The electric hum of a hidden device filled the silence briefly, a tool for measured torment. Berdella's eyes, cool and calculating, traced every subtle response: the involuntary jerk of a shoulder, a shallow gasp, the clenching of fists. Each reaction was logged in his mind, carefully recorded as if marking a map of control. There was an eerie rhythm to this dark ritual: sedation, restraint, psychological domination. The man's identity faded with every passing hour, reduced to a body and a set of responses. The basement was a crucible where humanity was stripped away piece by piece. Time lost meaning here. The outside world, its noise, its chaos, became distant and irrelevant. The basement's cold concrete floor and dim glow became a cage, an unyielding boundary. The man's muffled cries, though stifled, echoed faintly, swallowed by thick walls. When the moment came, it was not sudden but inexorable. A plastic bag, a taut knot, the slow extinguishing of breath. The silence that followed was absolute, oppressive, and final. In the aftermath, Robert worked methodically, stripping away signs of life as though erasing a moment that had never existed. The room reverted to cold stillness, the faint hum of the basement resuming its dominion. There was no joy here, only an unsettling calm, a quiet assertion of power and inevitability. Robert Berdella's world revolved around a chilling, calculated rhythm, an intricate pattern born of deep compulsions and twisted desires. His preferred victims were men who lived on society's margins, young, Caucasian, many entangled in lives of prostitution or addiction, acquaintances and strangers drawn together by fleeting contacts and moments of vulnerability. In the closing years of the 1980s, Kansas City's undercurrents made such lives invisible, easy to slip away without notice. In a time before the constant glare of digital surveillance and social media, these men were ghosts, lost in alleys, behind barroom walls, in the shadows of a city that often chose not to see. Berdella's hunting ground was neither wild nor remote. It was his own home, an unassuming house on Charlotte Street, where darkness hid in corners and the walls kept their own secrets. Here, the predator held dominion. Invitations were veiled in casual familiarity or need, a drink, a place to stay, a moment of kindness, before turning into a cage. Once inside, the process was merciless yet methodical. The young men were subdued with a cocktail of alcohol, prescribed sedatives, and animal tranquilizers, substances that numbed their bodies but sharpened their helplessness. Bound with piano wire so fine it bit cruelly into flesh, gagged to silence their pleas, and restrained on a bed that was less a place of rest than a platform for control, they became prisoners in a nightmare sculpted by Berdella's compulsions. Torture was both ritual and obsession, electric shocks delivered through makeshift instruments, applied with calculated precision. Beatings with blunt objects left marks not just on flesh, but on will. Invasive and degrading acts of sodomy, where the body became a canvas for domination, with objects ranging from his own fists to vegetables forced into unimaginable violation. The senses were assaulted further, eyes swabbed with bleach and caustics, ears stuffed, vocal cords injected with drain cleaner, all designed to degrade, disorient, and subjugate. Throughout, Berdella kept a detailed record, torture logs scrawled with shorthand, cryptic codes marking substances administered, the locations of injuries, the victim's reactions. Polaroid photographs froze moments of torment into permanent trophies, a macabre gallery chronicling his dominion over life and death. Yet amid this cruelty, there was an unsettling precision. Berdella's use of antibiotics and nutritional infusions suggested a desire to maintain his captive's fragile life, to prolong the slow dance of suffering. It was a calculated extension of control, not mere brutality, but a compulsive choreography of torment. When death came, it was usually by asphyxiation, smothering with plastic bags, a slow extinguishing of breath to end the agony on his terms. One victim died from exsanguination, a slow bleed that mirrored the physical and emotional draining that defined his captivity. After the final act, Berdella's post-mortem rituals began. Blood was drained methodically, bodies hung upside down, sliced open, washed clean in a chilling display of detachment. He dismembered his victims with tools ranging from kitchen knives to a chainsaw, fragmenting the human form into disposable pieces. Yet, he preserved select trophies, the heads buried in the backyard soil, wallets, IDs, tokens of conquest and memory, relics of his dark reign. In this pattern, lure, drug, imprison, torture, kill, dismember, Berdella's compulsions laid bare the contours of a mind consumed by control and cruelty. His victims were more than lost souls. They were the unwilling subjects of a horrific and methodical art of suffering. The story of Robert Berdella is not simply one of brutality. It is a dark mirror held up to a society willing to overlook the unseen, the marginalized, and the forgotten. The victims, young men often discarded by their communities, were caught in a cruel paradox, both hyper-visible to a predator and invisible to the world around them. Berdella's crimes unfolded in a time and place where the fragility of these lives was magnified by silence. The underbelly of Kansas City in the 1980s was a terrain shaped by neglect and tacit acceptance. The LGBTQ community, struggling for recognition and safety, lived in the shadows, and the destitute, the addicted, and the sex workers were easy prey, lost in the cracks between law enforcement, social support, and public concern. Even when Berdella was finally exposed, his confessions revealed a chilling detachment. He referred to his victims as play toys, as objects stripped of humanity. Despite the grotesque nature of his acts, he refused to express genuine remorse. Instead, he framed himself as misunderstood, as a man shaped by trauma who had simply made mistakes. His attempts to recast himself as a sensitive citizen betrayed a denial as deep as the darkness he had wrought. In the months following his arrest, the city grappled with the weight of his crimes. Auctions of his possessions attracted morbid curiosity and served the pragmatic purpose of covering legal fees. His house, once a site of horror, was sold and later demolished, a physical erasure of the violence hidden within its walls. Yet the scars left behind were not so easily erased. For the families of the victims, the unanswered questions, the missing remains, the stolen lives, etched a persistent void. For the community, Berdella's acts underscored the peril faced by those who live outside society's protections and the dangers of apathy toward the vulnerable. Berdella himself spent only a few years behind bars, his life ending not at the hands of justice's ultimate sanction, but quietly, alone, from a heart attack in prison. His death was met with biting cynicism from the very judge who had sentenced him, an irony not lost on those who watched the saga unfold. But beyond the sensational headlines and court proceedings lies a deeper truth: the failure to protect, to see, to hear. Berdella's reign of terror was fueled not just by his own pathology, but by a social landscape that allowed his victims to vanish unnoticed. Their stories, their suffering, were nearly swallowed by shadows until a desperate final escape shattered the silence. In the end, the chilling legacy of Robert Berdella is a warning and a lament. It is a testament to the fragile line between visibility and invisibility, safety and danger, humanity and dehumanization. It reminds us that evil often festers not only in the twisted mind of a killer, but in the gaps of a society that turns its gaze away. As the sun sets on the quiet streets where these tragedies unfolded, the memory of those lost lingers, ghosts haunting the margins, voices demanding to be heard, and a stark reminder that vigilance is the cost of justice, and compassion, the bulwark against darkness.